Hey guys, it's Sarah. I am usually one of the interviewers, but today Scott and I are going to be interviewed by Katie and Nicole. So we haven't told our story yet, so we thought that you guys would be interested in our story. So we'll get started. Tell us some basic details about your disability. Like, how long have you lived with the disability? How did it happen? That kind of stuff.
Sure. So I was a freshman in college at the time. I was at JMU. And the night before my second semester, my roommate and I decided to go skiing, and it was literally a freak accident. Basically, the short version of it is that I hit a patch of dirt, took a bad fall, landed on my head the wrong way, broke my neck. The result of that was a spinal cord injury, so it was a C6 burst fracture. It was an incomplete injury, so it didn't completely sever the spinal cord, but it bruised it pretty significantly. Nerve damage that didn't correct itself. And so since that injury, I've used a wheelchair ever since, and have had to kind of figure out life a little bit differently with spinal cord injury.
We met after his injury while I was in OT school. And so that's a long story in itself. We won't bore you with that right now. But after I started working as an occupational therapist, you had some other issues with your back.
In 2012, I actually had a second spinal cord injury. Essentially, I lost a little bit of sensation basically in one of my legs and some of my lower back and torso. We got that checked out. We discovered that there was some degeneration in the spine going on. One of the vertebrae had collapsed and injured the spinal cord a little bit lower down at T5. So first I injured my neck, and then my back was injured at T5. And so that required some corrective surgery. I had to have another back fusion done. And essentially that relieved pressure on the cord that was causing that sensation loss. So that kind of corrected itself. There was a little bit of damage that was residual from that. But the result of that was that now I have a whole lot more hardware in my back, which changed the way that I move around, kind of the mobility that I have for daily tasks that most people don't see, because it doesn't completely change the way that I move around using a chair, but it made a pretty big difference in terms of, little activities like getting dressed, getting in and out of the shower, getting in and out of the car, things like that became much more difficult because my back is now fused together. So there was a second injury in 2012. 2014, there was a third spinal cord injury. So I kind of have a crazy story with my back. So some of the hardware that was in my back didn't completely fuse to the bone. And there was basically a little bit of breakdown that was underneath where the hardware stopped. And that was at T11 or T12, in that range. Another vertebrae basically collapsed. It needed to be more stabilized, and it wasn't. And that put more pressure on the spinal cord down at T12. And so with that, there was some more sensation loss. We had to go get that checked out again. They had to go in, pull out all the hardware that was put in 2012, restabilize my spine, kind of put bigger screws in, longer rods in. And so now my back is fused from T2 to L1. Mm-hmm. So almost all of my thoracic vertebrae are fused together, and then right as it crosses into the lumbar region, it's fused as well. That, coupled with my initial injury back in 1999, where I broke C6, they fused above and below that, so I have a fusion of C5 to C7 as well.
So he has T1 hanging out up here without anything attached to it, and so it's like hardware in his neck, hardware in his back, and so yeah, it really did change just a lot how you were able to do things, transfer, get from place to place. And before he could, kind of move his shoulders like this to do things, and now his pivot point is at his waist. So you do have great posture now.
Yeah, so my posture's better. Functionally, things are a little bit different. Yeah, there's a lot of kind of unknowns that people can't see unless they understand the whole story.
In terms of what other people don't know about how this injury has impacted your life, what has been the number one thing regarding your abilities that you want people to understand?
This was a tough one because there's so many things involved with spinal cord injury. Mm-hmm. But what came to mind as I was thinking through this is generally the wheelchair is the easy part. And I say it's the easy part, not saying it's easy, but it's it's easy in the sense that we've figured out how to deal with it. And so we've kind of gotten in a routine. We know what the limitations are. We know what's needed for access and for moving around and for traveling and transportation and things like that. So we've figured out how to deal with the chair, but it's all the other stuff that kind of is part of life that people can't see, that they don't understand. And so I guess in terms of my abilities that I'd like people to understand, I've kind of got a little bit of a stubborn nature, and so
Sarah nods.
Yes, Sarah does nod. And so I generally try and just kind of not make a big deal about the injury, not make a big deal about the disability. But there's some limitations that I can't get around. Like there's some things that are unavoidable. I mean, I need physical access to get into spaces. I need to be able to get into bathrooms. I mean, some of that stuff is obvious. Some of the things I deal with, like especially in the warmer months, this injury affects my ability to sweat. So I don't sweat below my level of injury, which is basically like mid-chest down. And so if it's hot outside, this is just one example, like your body's going to compensate. It's going to say, hey, you need to start sweating so you can cool down. My body doesn't do that. And so that will raise my internal body temperature, put me in danger of heat stroke, things like that. And so there are a lot of little things that I personally have to be mindful of in order to function well in whatever scenario I'm involved with. So, I mean, heat's a big issue in warmer months, cold is an issue in cold months. I mean, just kind of keeping my body regulated. I have to be pretty mindful of taking care of my skin. So the surfaces I sit on and the things I lean against and the things that I do, I just have to make sure like I'm not putting too much pressure on one spot on the skin, because if sensation's diminished, then there's chance of breakdown, and then that leads into all other secondary complications as well.
Well, and even like he isn't able to tell temperature either. So water, or if you're cooking something, you know, like he can't really feel temperature in certain parts of his body. So that's other things that he has to be aware of. And you were talking about regulating your temperature. We went to a baseball game last year and it was so hot outside, and I knew, like, I was like, okay, we want to have fun. We're going to go to this baseball game. And like in my lunchbox, did I pack any food? No, I packed ice packs and ice, and because I was like, I'm going to like load him up with ice packs if I need to, so he can stay cool. And you were probably like, you probably did okay. We ended up leaving early just because everyone else couldn't stand the heat.
It's just like direct sun in the middle of the summer up at Camden Yards in Baltimore, and it just wasn't a comfortable day for anybody.
Yeah, but yeah, I mean, stuff like that, you just have to plan ahead for when you're going out to a cookout, or is there going to be shade? A fall festival. Fall festivals are great because the weather's great, but like a summer festival or something like that, we just know we can't be out in the heat of the day.
So all that to say, it's just more that the difficulty of this injury is more in what you can't see. Part of that was, I mean, just things I had to learn over the years and just kind of learn how to adapt and keep going.
I'd say another thing that people might not understand is the amount of time it takes to do things. So it just takes longer to get ready, it takes longer to get out the door, it takes longer to pack for when you're leaving, because you have to think of all the extra supplies and things that you might need. It just takes more time than sometimes I even anticipate that it's going to take.
Yeah.
So I'm sure throughout, the multiple injuries you've sustained throughout the years, you've made changes to your home. So can you explain what those were?
Sure. So I don't want to dwell on the kind of the multiple injuries too much, just because there wasn't a whole lot to change after the last two. The first one was the most significant. So I was 18 at the time, turned 19 while I was in rehab. But at that point, I was still in college. I wasn't out on my own, and so when I was not in college, I was back at home at my mom's house. The home we grew up in and the home she still lives in, it's a 3-story house. It's on a hill. It had multiple steps to get in, and really it just wasn't an accessible home. And so while I was in the hospital and going through rehab after my initial injury, this was out of state too. So I did my rehab out of state in Atlanta. She fortunately got in touch with some friends who did some contractor work and building work, and basically said, here's what we have to deal with. We need to make some changes to the home. I don't want to just slap a ramp on the front door and just make it functional. I mean, she was planning on living there for a while. This was almost 20 years ago. She's now still living there. And so fortunately, it doesn't look like a quote-unquote accessible home, but all the bedrooms were on the top floor. And so there was no easy way to put an elevator in, plus the elevator idea would be kind of expensive. And so that was considered, and then it was just like, no, this isn't realistic for this home. And so what we ended up doing is taking a formal living room that was on the main level and kind of chopping it in half, not really in half, but putting an additional bathroom in there, a wall, a closet, and then they made another bedroom on the main floor that was functional. So that was the big deal that happened inside. So just making a bedroom that wasn't up on the upstairs floor, as well as a bathroom that, I mean, had a sink that I could approach facing forward, so the cabinetry underneath couldn't be there. They put in a roll-in shower, things like that. The other major modifications that were done to that home were external. So I think there were probably, 3 or 4 steps to get into the front door. And again, this was on a hill, and so my mom decided to make a little addition onto the driveway, which was normally kind of, you go in and then it drops down to the lower level. They made an extension that kind of wrapped a little bit closer to the front door that was level, so there was a level parking space outside that had easy access to a new walkway that they raised up the landscaping outside. So there was basically a 0-step entry to get inside the front door, which made a big difference. So those were the big issues. So it's not a fully accessible house, but in terms of being able to take care of kind of the basic everyday needs, I mean, we made it work. So.
And when you were at JMU for the rest of the time, did that serve any barriers?
It did. So back in '99 and the early 2000s, the campus wasn't as functional and wasn't as accessible as it is today. The main lawn, or the main quad, had 2 sidewalks parallel down the sides of it. There was no curb cut to get up onto those sidewalks, so I regularly had to go all the way around to get to the 1 or 2 little accessible entrances to get on there. Fortunately, they were very receptive to that and made some changes to that pretty easily, because I was just kind of making some modifications to the sidewalks, so that was helpful. The big issue that I ran into at JMU was that I was, at the time, I was the only person who used a wheelchair full-time. There were a couple other people who used them part-time just to get around, but I was the only full-time user there. So in terms of me being somebody that kind of needed to, or had different mobility needs, I had to be pretty verbal about that. Not in a way that was kind of ruffling too many feathers, but the campus didn't work great. It worked all right. There was pretty much every building I could get into. It was a matter of figuring out where the accessible entrances were. It was typically, okay, I have to go the long way to get into certain buildings. Sometimes I had to go out one, go in the side of another, go through a random hallway instead of just going in the front door like everybody else there, it was a little frustrating, but it was one of those things that, I was like, well, it's another campus, they haven't gotten around to updating it, and it was one more thing I had to deal with among kind of being a full-time student as well. So it wasn't something that I fought too much. It was more just saying, hey, I need to be able to get into where I need to go.
And you drove a lot to classes, right?
Yeah, so when I was on campus, there were basically only two dorm options that would work well for me, in terms of a room that was big enough for a chair, I used a bed that had an adjustable head on it, so I needed a little bit more space. I used a roll-in shower chair at the time, and so I would transfer to a different chair, and then I'd roll into the shower to get cleaned up, so I needed a roll-in shower. There were only 2 rooms on campus that had those, and so one was on one side, and then one was all the way on the other side of the interstate, over on the newer side of campus. And so that presented some challenges just because there weren't a whole lot of places to live. And so with those 2 options, there was a lot of quote unquote foot travel. There was just a lot of distance I had to travel with a chair on a hilly campus, so that was challenging. Sarah mentioned that I drove a lot, so fortunately I was able to get a parking spot that was close to the dorm, so if I needed to go from the dorm that I lived in at the time to some of the academic buildings, I would be able to hop in the car and just drive there, which made a big difference. After my injury, when I went back to school, I mean, some of the challenges that I dealt with were probably more psychological and more emotional, just because it was a big change, and now I was kind of in isolation as that one person who used a wheelchair, and it eventually kind of got to the point that it was just what I did, but I mean, it still had some challenges at that time in my life.
And I feel like I remember you telling me you worked really hard at trying to figure out how to use things normally, because you didn't want to carry all this other equipment around, and so they had like one computer lab for you to go to do your work, but he was like, I don't want to have to work at that computer lab, like I want to be able to work anywhere. So I know he worked really hard at trying to use a regular mouse and regular keyboards and things like that, just because he was like, this is a lifetime thing, and I don't want to always have to carry this extra stuff with me.
Yeah, I mean, I was in a technology-related major at the time. I eventually kind of switched away from that, but it was something where a lot of the lab work and the things that we did were done in computer labs, and so the whole idea was, there's now a student who uses a wheelchair, we need to set up a separate workstation for him, and so on and so forth. And there's all sorts of cool modifications that we can do, and all this cool adaptive equipment, which was great that some of the staff and the faculty had that mindset, but it quickly became apparent that I couldn't just be in one lab all the time. Yeah. I mean, the classes were in different areas, and it didn't always work to just have that one space. And so not to critique any of the kind of the work that the OTs did that I worked with. So some of the therapists that helped kind of create recommendations for different tools and adaptations to kind of take notes or to operate a computer, things like that, just kind of became burdensome to say, okay, I need a specific typing device or a new tool to do this, that, and the other, and just to have to carry that around all the time, it's just like, there's got to be an easier way. So I kept it in the back of my mind as like, I know there are these other options, but I didn't want to make myself dependent on them. And so I was pretty, like I said, stubborn to figure out ways to make things work without needing those adaptations.
What are some things that you currently would like to change in your home to make it more user-friendly?
Yeah. So functionally, we live in an apartment right now, and so there's only so much we can do to the apartment. I mean, according to the laws, I mean, we can make changes that would make it more functional for us. But also according to the laws, if we did that, we would have to put them all back to quote unquote normal. And so it's an added expense that we haven't jumped on to say, let's completely redo our kitchen, or let's completely redo our bathroom, or completely redo something, because then we'd have to pay to put it all back, which just kind of seems counterproductive. And so at this point we haven't made a whole lot of changes to where we live, and we don't live in an accessible apartment either. And so the complex that we're in does have some accessible units, but they weren't available when we moved in. If they're not available, then they're not available.
But I think to, I guess, the credit of this building, they did put some more accessible functional features in there to begin with. So all of the doorways are wider. So that's helpful for us and just helpful for people in general. The bathrooms, we're kind of thinking that they were just trying to save money and didn't put any shelving underneath the bathroom sinks.
Yeah, there's no cabinets underneath the sinks. So. But
it works really well for him because he can just kind of roll right underneath the sink.
So there are a lot of functional elements about the place we live, and we chose it because of that too. So there's plenty of space to move around. The doorways are all wide enough.
There's a garage.
That's nice. So there's a garage which helps getting in and out of the car, and
elevator.
Yep. And so if we were able to make any changes, I think the bigger issues that we deal with are just kind of smaller spaces in the kitchen, and so a lot of things are out of reach for me. There's not a whole lot of great storage for food and for kind of the pots and pans and tools and stuff that we use. And so some of that just isn't within an easy to access kind of reach range. And so if we could make some changes, I mean, probably reconfigure the storage a little bit, make things a little bit easier to reach. The stove is a little difficult for me to use because it's the standard range and oven together, and so in order for me to be working at the stove, I have to sit sideways at it, which then creates a little bit of balance issue and discomfort with my back. And so there's some little things that I think if we were designing something from scratch, we would do things differently.
We've looked for other places to rent or purchase. And granted, there are some options out there, but we would have to do some modifications to make it easy for him to do a lot of things independently. And so at least with the apartment, I mean, he can get in and out by himself, and you can take care of some of the basic stuff. But, you know, even if we wanted to, you know, get a ranch home, like there's still stairs to get in. You know, the bathrooms are going to be small, and so it's just trying to weigh all of those, all the details.
And when you're involved in a major renovation or modification project, I mean, that takes time and it pulls away from what else you can manage in life. And I think we've kind of filled our schedule with enough stuff that adding one more major to do would prove a little bit difficult. So it's on the longer term plans of ours, but right now there's not a whole lot we're changing.
Right. And like he said, we've tried to make some changes in our place now. Like we have like a big bookcase that he can access like all of the like coffee cups and plates and bowls and things like that, because otherwise you wouldn't be able to reach any of those. And then he can do part of the laundry, so he can put stuff in the washer and put it in the dryer, but not really turn the dryer on because it's a stacked unit. Okay. And so
all the controls for the dryer are like way up here, and it doesn't work too well.
And those came with the unit?
Okay. Yeah. So, but I mean, we were actually surprised at how big the bathrooms were in the regular units. So that was definitely a big plus. Yeah. And then he uses a stand-up shower. It's a smaller shower. And he has a seat that he just puts in there. And the smaller shower tends to work better for him because he can transfer over, and then there's no fear of, you know, falling on the floor because you're kind of surrounded by walls. There's nowhere to fall. Yeah, and so some, you know, a lot of people are like, you know, really big showers are helpful, and they are to some degree, but for him, he prefers a smaller shower.
I mean, it's just a matter of figuring out what works, what fits within a smaller space, and then what can also accommodate a chair.
So I know both of you mentioned driving before. Can you explain what changed about driving and how it maybe prevented you from getting to leisure activities or out in the community?
Sure. Yeah, so after my injury, I mean, obviously the nerve damage took away the functionality of my legs, or my ability to use my legs, not the functionality. So essentially, the major modifications that needed to be done to a vehicle was just putting in hand controls. It took a little bit of time to get used to using them, but I mean, I've been driving since I think I started back in the fall after my injury. So it was the same year I was injured. Took a little bit of time just to make sure that I was stable and we knew what type of adaptations were needed to a vehicle, so we didn't kind of go overboard and say, well, somebody has a cervical spinal cord injury, so we've got all these other options, but then that kind of jacks up the price of the vehicle and all this other stuff. So really the only adaptation I use to drive is hand controls. When I initially started driving, we found a used accessible van, so it was wheelchair friendly. I could roll.
Had a ramp.
Yeah, had a ramp that folded outside. I could roll a chair in, and had a locking mechanism behind the driver's, or behind the steering wheel. So I essentially used my chair as a driver's seat. I would pull in, lock it in place, and off I went. Eventually it got to the point that the chair I was using at the time, it was a power chair, and just kept having problems with it. And it broke down, but the van was still running, and so I was like, all right, well, let's switch the driver's seat over. So I put the regular driver's seat back in place, and then started to transfer out of one chair, which then opened up more opportunity for using either a power chair or a manual chair, and being able to transfer into a seat. So that made a big difference. Still using the same controls to drive, just the seating changed a little bit.
Okay.
Eventually that van died. Like it had kind of served its purpose and wore itself out. So at that point, I mean, I had a kind of a project vehicle I was working on for a while. Still have it, still needs work. It's a Jeep Wrangler. But it's been kind of a headache just because there was so much that had to be customized in it. But it was a similar setup where I would transfer to the driver's seat using controls. There's a wheelchair lift in the back of it. But more regularly, we just used regular cars. And so right now we have a Subaru Outback. So being able to transfer in and out of regular cars made a big difference just because that opened up all sorts of options. And the one downside to that is that I couldn't use a power chair. Like it had to be a chair that I could easily fit a manual chair into. And so even just that in itself just kind of changed the way that I said, okay, well, here's how I'm going to approach community mobility. Like I'm just going to use a manual chair. Living in a hilly area, that wasn't always the easiest thing. And if I was on my own, I would have to transfer into a car as well as take a chair apart to get it in the car so I could take it with me. We chose the Subaru pretty specifically because it's a wagon, and so if I'm with somebody or if I'm with Sarah, we can get in the car. The chair, we just fold the backrest down and just throw it in the back. So there's not a whole lot of tear down that has to be done. If I'm by myself, the wheels have to come off, the chair has to fold up, wheels go in the back seat, chair sits in the passenger seat. It's a little bit of a process, and it does take a little bit of time. And I mean, it got to the point that I could do it under 2 minutes. Like it wasn't a big deal. Under 2 minutes is still a lot of time if it's raining.
That's right.
So there's all sorts of other little variables to think about there. But that's what we did for a while. When I had this other surgery back in 2012, and then the redo in 2014, that changed the way that I could easily transfer in and out of the cars. Just because one of the big limitations is that I can't really twist my body a whole lot this way. And if you think about the way that, like if you're sitting in the driver's seat and then imagine a chair sitting outside the car and you have to figure out how to get that chair inside, there's kind of a lot of twisting motion that had to be done. And so that's changed the way that I can drive independently. Driving itself, the act of kind of sitting behind the wheel and steering and gas and brake and all that stuff, I'm fine with that, but it's getting in and out, getting the chair in and out independently has changed, and now that's more difficult. I could probably do it in a pinch, but it's not comfortable and it's bad for my back. And so now we still have our Subaru, and so if I'm going to go somewhere, I typically need a little bit of help getting in and out of the car. Ideally, the best option would be to get a vehicle that has a lift in it or a ramp to get a chair in that I don't have to take the chair apart. But we don't have that right now. It's just kind of an extra expense. So again, it's one of those things that we're like, that would make our life easier, but we can't do it right now because it's a cost issue. So.
Well, and people have offered to help and things like that, but I think it's hard on you because for so many years you were able to do that like independently and just to go. I mean, because even when we first got married, like I would go to work as an OT and then he'd get up and then go to school after that. And so, these last 2 surgeries really changed a lot of how you do things independently, especially the driving part, to be able to go out and just do that on your own. And you have been able to do that, and just to have other people help, it's just not one of the first things that you or most people would want to jump on.
I mean, the place we work is thankfully within walking distance of our apartment, so that takes away that variable of needing transportation. We've always lived in semi-rural areas. I mean, we live in a kind of a downtown area right now, but we don't live in a big city. Like we don't live in an area that has amazing public transportation. So sure, we have a bus system and there's paratransit here, and I could call to get rides, but that adds an extra layer scheduling, and I mean, it changes the ease of being able to say, oh, I just need to run to the store to get some ingredients for dinner, or I want to go over to a friend's house and we'll probably be there till, I don't know, 9, 10, 11 at night, and how do I get home? I mean, things like that aren't they're not as seen, like it's not as obvious. And thankfully I have a gracious wife who helps as needed. But yeah, it makes a difference in terms of independence. So, I mean, ideally, it'd be great to get an accessible vehicle. The challenges with that, again, are really just cost, because I mean, there aren't a whole lot of options that we can just kind of go to the store and buy one out of the box. The companies that modify minivans or SUVs, for example, they basically take the vehicle and then they cut the entire floor out of it, and then lower the floor, and then put in a ramp. I mean, the modification itself is between $25,000 and $30,000 for most vehicles.
Huge.
And so it's just...
And that's on top of purchasing the vehicle
Yeah.
in the first place. So it's almost probably $60,000, $70,000 for a new vehicle.
Yeah, so if we wanted to buy something brand new, it's expensive. And so
Yeah.
kind of adding the hand controls in there is another $1,000. And I mean, it all adds up. And so it's something we're like, okay, how can we plan for this as we move forward in the future? Because that would make life easier, especially if our family grows and things like that. But okay, let's be realistic. Because I mean, if I didn't have this injury, I mean, it probably wouldn't be a consideration for us to be like, oh, we need to go find another $60,000, $70,000 car. So, I mean, that's just like...
We might choose a little different price range.
Right.
Let's not take a mortgage out for this.
Right.
Exactly.
And so, and really, I mean, that's something that's brand new. I mean, there are used options out there. So I'm not trying to say that that's the only solution, but just to kind of give a little bit of perspective on kind of the way that some of this stuff just costs more money just because there's an injury. So.
Yeah, and you know, when you have all of those mechanics in a van, I mean, there are more moving parts. You know, things break, and I remember when we were dating and we were using you had your Jeep at that point, and the ramp broke, and so I was in the back like hand cranking the ramp down because he had to get out of the car. It was his transportation. So
fortunately, I mean, fortunately, I had a manual backup to it, but again, it was one of those things. It's like I needed help to get that thing down, and it was just a headache to use.
How does your disability impact the way you participate in things in the community, such as leisure activities that you like to do?
So it kind of depends on what the activity is. I mean, some of the social activities, it's just kind of being around people who understand what I deal with. And for me, it's trying to not make a big deal about it. But if we can choose a location that's accessible, that makes a big difference. If we can choose an activity that I can actually physically get to or physically participate in, that kind of takes care of most of the major issues. But really, I mean, there is a dependency I have on different supports now. And so, like when I say supports, depending on the type of activity, I mean, that could be equipment, that could be extra people to help a little bit. I mean, if some of those aren't really an issue, like, I mean, if it's just kind of going out and going to a movie or going to dinner or something like that, that's really just like, is the location we're going to, is it accessible? But if we're going on one of the things that I had a few years ago was an adaptive bike. And so if we were going on a bike ride, how could I transport it there, and how could I get a little bit of help getting on and off the bike? And is the place we're riding, is it going to be something that's doable for a bike that's a little bit different than the typical two-wheel bike? I mean, this one was wider. It was a little bit wider than a standard chair. And so there are a lot of little considerations that essentially, if I need extra help, whether it's from equipment or whether it's from people, it's just really being mindful of what some of those are. Kind of like what we were talking about with transportation, though. I mean, some of that costs money, and so that's created a little bit of a barrier for us as well. It's not like I can just say, hey, there are these cool activities out there, I want to go do X, Y, or Z. But there's more planning, there's more just kind of figuring out, okay, how do we make this work? And some of it's easy, but some of it takes time and effort from others as well.
There are a few like walking trails that are easy to do around here. I mean, we live near the national park, and so there are a few accessible trails. I think maybe 2 that we've done, 2 or 3. But
out of 100.
yeah,
So.
yeah.
So many.
And so just a lot of planning, a lot of research. I remember we were in North Carolina one time, and there was this park that we wanted to go to, and there was this overlook, and they said on their website that there was like this paved path, and I was like, paved wide path, like those are great, great words for us to hear, because we know that we could get there. And so we got out of the car, and we started going up this path, and then the path was so steep. Like I that was nowhere on the website. Like, that's very important information.
Absolutely.
And so we got out of the car, and we were first married at this point, and I was like, we're gonna get up there. I'm gonna get you to the top. And so at this point, he was still using a manual chair, but didn't have any power attachments onto it. And so here I am, like literally my legs outstretched, like trying to push him up this hill. And he's like, you got it? Are you okay? I'm like, fine, I can do this. And then I kept looking up the hill and thinking, this thing's so long. And we eventually stopped.
And then we'd have to go back down.
Right.
Yeah.
We eventually stopped and turned around, and it was so steep I had to back him down, because I think he would have fallen out.
Like a wheelbarrow.
Yeah. If we had gone forward. And so at that point, he was like, well, I'll just stay down here. You can walk to the top. And I was like, well, that's not what we had really planned, So I did. I went up to the top and took some pictures. And we typically have to do that if there's not anything accessible, like touring old historic houses or something like that. Like, he can't get to certain areas, so if I'm allowed to take pictures, I'll take pictures and kind of show him what it looked like.
But it changes the experience too. I mean, it's not, it's them not doing something together because of a physical issue or an environmental issue, which is, it's frustrating at times. So even like Sarah mentioned, the national park, so there's a trail up in Shenandoah that's kind of praised as the wheelchair accessible trail, which they've done a very good job with it. But it's also kind of loose gravel in some places, and it's a little steeper than kind of some of the standards that you would normally find around the community in some places. And so where it's not as rocky, and technically you can roll something over it. I mean, there was one overcast day that, I mean, things were they were a little damp, and I mean, my chair sank into it a little bit. And so sure, it was the accessible trail, but I mean, my chair didn't do great with it. And so it's still required.
We had 2 attachments on it. We had a power attachment on it, and then he has this other attachment called a free wheel that gets the little wheels off of the ground. So like, it's kind of like the difference between a regular stroller and a running stroller. So like the running strollers have bigger wheels so they can go over more things.
Rougher terrain and stuff.
And so we had that thing on the front to get the little wheels up, and the thing on the back, and I mean, it worked. We had an outdoor experience, but and sometimes like that trail really didn't go anywhere. Like sometimes you get to the end of trail and you're like, ooh, an overlook, or ooh, a waterfall. That one just like kind of went in a circle, and then we were back.
Start at the parking lot, and then you end at the parking lot, and you're like,
look at all these trees.
Okay.
Yeah.
So kudos to the Park Service for creating it, but it's not quite the same experience as some of the other trails offer. So I mean, it's just dealing with some of the options that are out there for us is one thing, and sure, there are options that exist, and that's great, and we're grateful for that. If those options weren't there, then we'd be kind of stuck completely. But there's still a lot more opportunity that's available.
Right.
Good.
So.
What would you guys say is one thing that you would change out in the community to make it easier for you to participate in something that you enjoy?
It's a loaded question. I know.
Yeah.
It's one thing.
I know. What is one thing?
Yeah. So when I was thinking about this one, I think like initially, like we talk about physical barriers a lot, and so it's like, can we actually physically get someplace? And so, I mean, that's easily something that's tangible for people when it's like, well, can you go to a restaurant? Can you get into a concert venue? Can you go to the grocery store? Things like that. And generally, like the physical things are, they're more obvious. But one of the barriers that we talk about within our organization at least, is like the attitudes and the perceptions that people have about people who are involved in the disability community. And so I was trying to figure out, like, is that something to bring up here? And it's, I think it is. Like, I think if there was something to change, I think I'd kind of make a suggestion to change the attitude that that people who are affected by disability, they need some sort of special options to participate. And in some cases, yeah, that may be the case. But there's still, like, there's so many different ways to look at that in terms of, okay, well, somebody uses a wheelchair, so we need to make sure that they have this special seating in this special section, and we want them to be part of it, but we'll put them over there. Mm-hmm. Like, they can still be part of it, but they need their own space. And it's kind of a complicated discussion because there are some families who are, for example, like dealing with sensory issues, and there is a need for kind of some separation there. Right. But at the same time, there are people who are dealing with different types of disabilities that the real limitation is either the environment or the interactions between people. And if those limitations were taken away, then the disability itself wouldn't really be an issue. And so I think just being able to help people see that and help people understand a little bit more about, okay, what's it mean if there are people who might have a spinal cord injury in your community and they use a wheelchair? What does that mean for them to be able to participate in an event that's going on? I mean, just some of those things that if there was an understanding of the people who are involved with running an activity or running a program or who owned a space, if they had a little bit more understanding about just what people deal with, and like this is one big reason we're telling people stories, is just to help people understand that, I mean, there are a whole lot of just things that people deal with that if you're aware of it, then you can accommodate that pretty well. But if you're not aware of it, then you don't know, and that's not a kind of a fault of yours. It's just a matter of ignorance that, like, it's just not overcome yet. Like, it's just one more thing to learn about the communities that we live in.
And I think sometimes the solution is easier than what people think, and it can be a more like inclusive situation or an inclusive solution. Like, I remember one time we went to a movie, and I guess it wasn't a very popular movie. I don't remember what it was, but we were like one of or two of like 4 people or something in the theater, and the accessible seating was like off in a corner. And we're like, we're the only ones in here. So we actually asked for a chair so he could sit in the middle of an aisle so we could just be in front of the screen. And so, like, even in that example, like, it's not like we need a special section. We just need a section that, like, is level. Right. And so, I mean, that can be integrated within regular seating. Yeah. But I think you're right. I think it's the attitudes and being aware of what people need and what people want, and then finding a solution. And it might be a solution that doesn't even exist yet, but people can collaborate together to figure something out to make it more inclusive for people to be a part of an event, program, et cetera, et cetera.
And some of it's just understanding what would help people be successful in different things.
So what advice do you have for somebody who's interacting with you or your family for the first time and they're curious about you?
So the easy answer would be just to be open about it and to ask about it. My injury happened almost 20 years ago now, and so it's basically part of our quote unquote normal. Like, it's just what we deal with. It's not something that we dwell on all the time, even though it makes life difficult. I mean, we just kind of deal with it. But it's not like, hey, we have a disability, we need to tell you our whole life story, we need to explain all the little details of what it means that I use a chair and blah, 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 and this is what we need physical access-wise and stuff like that. Like, we don't try and get into a whole lot of those details unless they're needed. And so with that, if there's a curiosity, I mean, that's great. People are generally curious. They see somebody who uses a wheelchair, they're like, okay, what's the matter with him, or what happened, or
what's their story?
Like yeah. And so for us, at least, it's helpful if people just feel comfortable striking up a conversation and say, hey, why do you use a chair? What happened? Or, I mean, sometimes people they'll tiptoe around it. They don't want to be offensive, and I understand that. Like, some people are private. They don't want to share their stories. There may be some hurt related to it, and they just don't want to get into something that was traumatic and has persisted through life.
Sure.
But for us, I mean, it's not a big deal if somebody's like, hey, can I ask you a personal question? And then you're like, so what happened to you? And so I mean, it's fine telling the story, and I've kind of gotten into a little groove where I can just say, well, I was skiing, took a bad fall, landed on my head the wrong way, broke my neck, and now I have nerve damage and my spinal cord's damaged. So yeah, so that's why I use a chair. And I mean, it's a quick answer, and I'm usually a little bit more gracious about it instead of just kind of brushing them off like that. But I'm fine if people are curious and they want to talk about it. And so I think, it's just being willing to realize that, I mean, we're still kind of normal people as much as you can define normal, I guess.
No one's normal.
Right.
So,
and I think it's funny because when I've been doing these interviews, most everyone has the same response that you just did about like, just ask me. Like I'm pretty open about talking about it. Just don't be weird about it. Don't like, don't touch me or move my chair without asking, or but most people have said like kids, like they're totally fine kids asking because they're just generally curious.
the kid, I mean, they're kids, and they have a slightly limited perspective on the world, and I mean, they say, well, why don't your legs work? And so, I mean, sometimes I'll try and explain, well, my legs don't work because my neck broke, and then that's just not something that makes a whole lot of sense. And so trying to get into a kind of an in-depth medical discussion with kids only goes so far. So I have to be pretty vague with kids.
It is funny because sometimes they're just curious and they want an answer. And so, I mean, some kids will like be, well, stand up. And you're like, well, I can't. And they're like, well, try. And he's like, I can't. Okay. And I mean,
then that's fine with them.
Then they're done. That's all they needed. And it's okay for parents to have their kids ask. Some people aren't, but I know he's okay with it.
Yeah, I mean, kids are much more curious, or at least openly curious. Parents may be curious as well, or adults may be curious as well, but
they don't want to be offensive.
Right. And so, I mean, we'll be. I mean, let's say we're in a grocery store and there's a kid and he's fascinated by these wheels wheels typically aren't inside, and so there's just like a stare, and then the mom or the parents are being like, stop it. And it's more, there's a curiosity there, and that's okay.
And I think like the other day I was getting his chair out of the back of our car, and there was a kid eating ice cream at a local ice cream place, and he was just telling me about his ice cream that he was eating and how he really liked vanilla. And then I pulled his chair out and he goes, "Oh no, are you hurt?" And so I think they're just curious, caring, and concerned.
Kind of gotten to the point over the years that yes, it was a traumatic situation for me, and but it is what it is. It's part of my story, and I mean, it's obvious that something happened. So I mean, I figure why not just be transparent about it.
Absolutely.
So.
Yep.
What advice would you give some community organizations or businesses for making it easier for you guys to kind of participate?
Yeah, so kind of what we've talked about before. I mean, the attitudes are one thing, but like if there's something that's specific to what we deal with, it's mostly the physical access side of things. I mean, I think just kind of being in this niche of universal design and understanding a lot of the issues that are out there, it's hard for us to be like, okay, well, here's what we need compared to here's what would make things easier for anybody. But yeah, I mean, for us, it's really physical access.
And I think, the law is there. I mean, you have the ADA for physical access, but I think a lot of times that isn't implemented very well or thought through. And we often say
there's a difference between legal accessibility and functional accessibility.
And so I think just to have, businesses think through how could they go beyond what is there on the code, and what else could they do to make things more welcoming for others. And you have a ramp, but it might be really steep, or parking, or I know there's just so many different areas. But I think instead of just following the letter of the law, to think a little beyond and hear people's stories and consider, okay, how could I make my establishment even more welcoming to people who want to come in and want to, either be a patron or hang out with their family, things like that.
Yeah, I mean, some of it's really just understanding the people in our communities. And so if there's an understanding, like if you have a personal friendship with somebody, so you guys know me, if you wanted to say, hey, let's go out to a dinner sometime, and you were the ones who were organizing it, it wouldn't be, okay, what do we need to consider for that? I mean, it'd be like, well, let's just find an accessible location and we'll make it work. But some of that is because we already have this relationship and this connection. And so for businesses who may not know other families in the community who are dealing with disability, or they may not know what some people deal with, it's harder for them to just kind of be able to say, oh yeah, we need to, and then fill in the blank with whatever accommodation is needed. I mean, if there's not an understanding of what people deal with and what would make things successful for them, then it's going to be hard. Yeah. And so some of it is getting beyond the mindset of, okay, well, we have these laws and these codes and these regulations we have to follow, so if we do that, then we're taken care of. Sort of. Like that's certainly a good
first step.
Yeah, it's a good first step, and it'll get you a long way there. But it also helps to know people and to help understand what people go through.
Does your disability impact your relationships with other people in any way?
Yeah, I mean, and I would say this also goes back to how they can grow and how they can flourish. And so what I mean by that is it's not as easy for us to just go over to a friend's house. Most of our friends aren't in the same complex that we live in. Like, we don't live in a little commune of just our people. And so when there's stuff going on with friends in the community and they're saying, hey, we're having a bunch of people over for a Super Bowl party, that changes the dynamic of things. Like, that's not always easy to figure out. And so I mean, if it's in someone's house where there's a flight of stairs to get in, that creates a challenge. And so the option is for me to kind of risk being carried in. Sometimes that works, sometimes it doesn't. It's not the most it's not the most comfortable thing for me. People are always willing to help, but it's just like, oh, come on, like, do I have to deal with this again? And so that just, over time, it just creates kind of one little barrier here and there. It makes it difficult. And so there are ways that we have to kind of figure out how to deal with that. I mean, sometimes it's having people over to our place. Sometimes it's going out and doing stuff. I mean, if you go out more, then it costs more. I mean, there's all sorts of little variables that are part of this. And so, like, with the physical access side, that's where I'm just saying, like, it affects what we can do to build those relationships. So my injury itself, I mean, especially with people who knew me beforehand, it hasn't really changed how we interact. It's changed the options of what we can do and how we can continue to build those friendships and relationships. But yeah, I would say that's probably the biggest challenge that we deal with.
People have been, they connect with us and say, what can we do to make it work, or what is an option to make it work? And I think that it's helpful because there's the willingness there to say, hey, we really want to hang out with you guys. We want to continue to, be in community with you guys. And so what can we do to make it work? And generally that's awesome, because that then we can tell them what we might need. But then they aren't put in a weird situation themselves to be like, well, we can invite him, but we don't know. And then we could do this, but I'm not sure. And then if it's all out on the table, then we can all kind of come to an agreement of, what works and what doesn't, and then go from there.
Yeah.
What is it that you wish more people knew about you?
Man, so I guess in relation to everything we've talked about, I would say that our life, I mean, as a couple, I mean, we still have the same challenges that we deal with as everybody else. So we're still, we still kind of deal with the same struggles with work and with family and other dynamics and things like that. But because I use a chair and because I have an obvious disability, I mean, the focus that a lot of people have is that's what we deal with. And so, like, the biggest struggle in Scott and Sarah's life is that Scott has a spinal cord injury and he uses a wheelchair. We figured that part out. Sure, it's hard. Like, there are a lot of challenges and difficulties that we deal with related to that, but because it's it's part of our kind of our normal and our everyday life. We've figured it out, but that's still kind of the external understanding of, well, that's what they struggle with, which is true, but we also struggle with everything else that other married people deal with, and other kind of people who are in the working world deal with, and sometimes that gets overshadowed because of my injury, sometimes those are the bigger, kind of more stressful issues that we're dealing with. It's just like, okay, if we could solve this one problem, then life would be easier. Yeah, I mean, there's a lot more complexity to life than just this injury.
Hey everyone! Thank you, Scott and Sarah, for sharing your story with us. Scott and Sarah provided some valuable insight on what life is like living with a spinal cord injury.
It was very intriguing to learn about how their lives have evolved from Scott's initial unexpected accident to where he and Sarah are today. The additional videos and pictures provided throughout their interview have helped us to gain a greater understanding of their story.
Scott and Sarah shed some light on the barriers of transportation and traveling, what it's like to live in different environments, including on a college campus, and how participation in leisure activities has changed for them over the continuum of life. They offered some valuable advice to individuals who interact with them, and they continue to be great resources and expertise for Universal Design.
We appreciate you tuning in to hear their story and hope that you'll continue to watch more stories from other amazing individuals. Thanks again from the Universal Design Project.